I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Hey you guys, happy Tuesday and welcome back to the News du Jour. I totally forgot to tell you all, the transcripts are back up on our website. Our website is functioning as normal, so if you are typically someone who reads the News du Jour, it's back up there. And if you've never heard of our transcripts before, if you'd ever prefer to read the News du Jour exactly how I'm going to say it on the podcast, you can do so on our website. Just hover over podcasts on the main page and you'll see in the drop down, it'll say transcripts. So you can always read them. And if you want to go back and read through one that we had, weeks ago or even over a year ago, all of the transcripts live there. So that's just a feature for you guys so that you can keep up with everything that we're saying on the podcast. Anywho, game plan for today, because it's a somewhat slow news day, I thought that we would walk through all of Trump's various legal battles and their status so that you guys can know everything that's going on with him legally. That way, if things get moving fast here, which they definitely could in any one of these 6 cases, you will know the lay of the land. But before we dig into that, I do have a couple quick updates for you guys here at the top. First up, I wanted to give you guys an update on Puerto Rico. Okay, so Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico, at the time that I'm writing this, still has the power out all across the island, with about 1.3 million customers still having no electricity. It will likely take a couple days to get these lights back on for everyone. Efforts to rescue stranded civilians are underway. So far, over 1,000 people have been rescued, but there are likely a ton more still stranded, and the federal government is down there working with the governor to try and find everyone and get them to safety and supplies. This governor, Pedro Pierluisi, it's his first hurricane as governor, and it's a big job. Let's pray that he leads his people to the best of his ability and helps restore stability after the storm. And then I also, of course, had to touch on Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. So Queen Elizabeth II has now been lowered into the ground at Windsor Castle, her final resting place, in a royal vault with her father, mother, and sister. The interment was private, but the procession was very public. Of course, there was a ton of scrutiny over the princes and their wives, despite the very somber, momentous occasion. But you won't hear any of that on this podcast. The services concluded with the national anthem and a now standard, God Save the King. Okay, now without further ado, we will go ahead and commence walking through Trump's 6 different ongoing legal battles. Again, since today was a slower news day, I thought we would take the minute to walk through these different court situations so that you guys are updated and just have a better lay of the land on each individual case. So let's dive in. I know it's confusing because actually there's two sets of 2 that are kind of like overlapping. So that's where I think some of the confusion can come in. So I will be sure to clarify the differences there. But first of all, let's talk about Georgia. So if you remember back to like the wake of the 2020 presidential election, my home was still out of power. due to an October ice storm here in Oklahoma. I can remember it so clear as day. And I was working from a coffee shop every day, just trying to get you guys the news du jour as best I could, given that I didn't have heat, let alone internet in my house. But at that time, President Trump was doing everything in his power to discredit or overturn the election results. And this included a phone call to Georgia's Secretary of State, where he demanded that the Secretary of State, quote, find 11,780 votes, end quote. That was so that President Trump could take the state of Georgia and try to continue in his bid to stay president. And, well, one does not just go about finding votes after an election. That's not a thing. And pressuring an elected official like that is a serious crime, and made worse by the fact that it was coming from the Oval Office. He told the Secretary of State, a fellow Republican, that he would be taking a, quote, big risk, end quote, if he did not find those votes. Woof. Now, the Fulton County District Attorney is taking Trump on because of these actions. Her name is Fani Willis, and she is not holding back. She seems to be building a case of conspiracy to commit election fraud against the former president or potentially racketeering. She's compiling all the evidence now, and we'll have to wait and see what is to come of it. Okay, so that was what is going on now in the state of Georgia. Now we're going to go up north to Manhattan. Now, I have to point out here that there's also a case going on in New York State, but I don't want you guys to get these two confused. The Manhattan case is what we are discussing now, and it is separate. In the Manhattan case, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, will be looking into legal issues surrounding the Trump Organization and its businesses as part of a criminal investigation. They are bringing charges of fraud and tax evasion to trial starting October 24th. In a related case just recently, the Trump chief financial officer, Alan Weaselberg, yes, that's his actual name, has already pled guilty to 15 felonies. He will be testifying in this trial against the Trump Organization as part of his plea deal. Trump himself is not being charged in this case, at least not yet. It's his company that is in trouble here. Again, at least as of now. And that is a very important distinction. Next up, what we just heard about was Manhattan. And now we are going to discuss the New York State case, which is similar. Don't get me wrong, similar. But this is a civil case as of right now, rather than a criminal one. The investigation, though, has been going on for over 3 years now. So it's been a long time coming. This is, if you remember, where Letitia James, we've talked about this case a lot, the New York State Attorney General, is examining his business practices on a state level. She is who recently brought Trump into court to have him answer questions. And if you remember, he took the fifth over 400 times. His lawyers actually are trying to settle this case as of recently, which may mean that they are concerned about where it might be headed. Stay tuned. Okay, so that was the New York State case, and now we are shifting gears back to Washington and talking about January 6th. In terms of January 6th, there is, of course, the January 6th committee in Congress that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what we're talking about now is an investigation conducted by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland into the January 6th riots. So this dude is not giving us any hints on where he is headed with this investigation. But he has been slowly pulling the threads out of the January 6th ordeal, sort of starting on the periphery with the people who were least involved. Basically, since it happened, he's been doing this. He started with, again, the most basic crimes that were committed and has spent his time since the event prosecuting hundreds of criminals who broke the law during the deadly riots. But now he's working his way closer and closer towards the former president, interviewing lower-level people who worked in the White House, seizing phones and other electronics from Trump's advisors, and handing out subpoenas like they're candy to those in Trump's inner circle. He is playing shit very close to the chest, but he definitely appears to be circling President Trump and potentially weighing his options until it's the perfect time to strike. And next up, number 5. So that was our 4th court situation, investigation, litigation. There's a lot going on here. But number 5, let's just call them legal battles because they're all in such different phases. But the 5th legal battle that we will discuss is actual Congress. So as you guys know, Trump is being investigated by a congressional committee on his relationship to the January 6th attacks. But more specifically, his efforts to convince the country that the election was fake. They have had many of Trump's own advisors testify that they informed the president that the election was not stolen, that the results were legitimate, and that he was telling the American people lies. And yet, he carried on. Congress itself has no ability to prosecute anyone, just so that's clear. They cannot bring charges against President Trump, but they can issue subpoenas, which would force people to come in and answer questions. And then from those answers, or lack thereof, if someone doesn't come in to a subpoena, the Justice Department can bring charges as they see fit. So far, criminal charges have been filed against Peter Navarro and Stephen Bannon just based off of this investigation in Congress. And there could be more to come. And lastly, number 6, the classified documents and the FBI. As we all now know, President Trump made the decision to leave the White House with a large number of highly classified documents. He does not deny this, and it's a crime to do so. He was asked many times by the National Archives and then by the FBI to give the documents back. Trump and his lawyers first said they had returned the documents, then they agreed that they needed to return them, but they just never did. They continued to kind of dodge the FBI until the FBI finally informed the Trump camp that they were going to have to execute a search warrant for these documents. And they did. That led to the national news story that we're discussing now. As you guys know, they marched into Mar-a-Lago and found boxes of hundreds of classified documents ranging in security level, but none that should have ever left the White House. As a reminder, classified documents involve the safety of Americans, and thus they have to be housed in places that are approved as secure. Mar-a-Lago does not have that type of security needed to be approved, nor has Trump ever really pursued getting it approved. Trump has argued that because presidents have the authority to declassify documents, he was fine to take these to Mar-a-Lago. But the thing is, Trump did not declassify these documents. There's a paper trail when things like that go down, and it's required to get approvals and signatures that these documents just don't have. The American people are still not privy to exactly what these documents are, and for good reason. They likely involve measures to keep us safe. But it's still frustrating because it would be so interesting and revealing, probably, to find out what President Trump felt a need to keep so close, especially when it's against the law. We may find out should this case be prosecuted in any way, but as of right now, things are kind of tied up in court. If you guys remember, they're trying to decide on a grand master for this case, as well as who can review what and when in terms of these highly sensitive documents. In the meantime, Trump has to be feeling this noose tightening around his neck. He's fighting battles in a lot of different directions, and they're all pretty serious. He's struggling to find lawyers who will work with him, as many of his former lawyers are now tied up in investigations themselves from their time representing him. And new ones are too scared to get involved. It's getting a little nutty in here, which is why I wanted to take the time to really break this down for you guys. I hope this helps you understand exactly what's been happening with these 6 different legal battles, so that if and when we see movement, you'll already know the bigger picture. And that is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "Change is inevitable. Growth, though, is optional." If you enjoyed this episode, please consider becoming a patron of our podcast. For $7.99 a month, you can unlock tons of perks like breaking news text messages so that you're never out of the loop. Tons of bonus episodes are already up there ready for you to binge, and a discussion board full of networking opportunities and much more. Go to www.patreon.com/sugarfree media today to become a patron. This is the best way to support our show. Our patrons make News du Jour possible. But a couple other ways to support our podcast are rate and review on whatever podcast platform you use to listen, share on your social media, you have influence, tell your friends, family, and colleagues that you love News du Jour and why you listen. You can also follow us on social media under sugarfreemedia.co on Instagram, just sugarfreemedia, all one word, on TikTok, and sugarfree_media on Twitter. We also have a weekend newsletter called Dreamers Digest that's full of dreamy content recommendations for your weekend and a life update from yours truly. Sign up today on our website, www.sugarfreemedia.co. Our music is by Joey Lavoie and Nicholas Foster. Our cover art is by Hannah Pierce Photography. Our Sugar Free Media logo is by Catherine Jezik Designs. Any twinkling or little footsteps you might hear in the background are by my dog, Rhett. He's a rescue pup and always records with me. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from Oklahoma.